Utah's governor was recently inaugurated for a second term, and in his inaugural speech, he laid out a vision for the next 4 years. So what does it really take for a state to be successful?
Utah's not number one because of government. It's because of the people.
The governor's speech focused more on broad principles and civic institutions than policy details, but that actually might be precisely the message our state and nation need right now. You're listening to Defending Ideas. Defending Ideas is a weekly podcast produced by Sutherland Institute. On this show, we are committed to renewing the principles of common sense conservatism, making you a better champion of sound ideas. Welcome back to another episode of Defending Ideas. I'm your host, Nic Dunn, and this week we're talking about response to Governor Spencer Cox and his inauguration speech that just recently happened. Very excited to be having with us in the studio Aimee Winder Newton. She is a senior advisor to Governor Cox on family issues and the director of the Utah Office of Families. Aimee, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. So happy to talk about this. Wasn't it a good speech?
It was great. I mean, watching this, inaugural speeches are more rare, of course, because they're only every 4 years at the beginning of a new term. And it's distinct from a state of the state in that it's not usually a laundry list of policy ideas. The governor really kind of leaned into this idea of broad principles and kind of what I appreciated about it was really the core of what makes Utah different and unique. And we'll go through some of that. But one, I just want to kind of get, what's your general reaction watching the speech? Anything else from the whole week of festivities with inauguration? What do you think folks need to know, especially if they didn't actually see the speech?
Yeah, well, the governor always has put such a priority on, besides policy, faith, family, service. Those are things that he really believes in. And so when we look at the inauguration week, it was fun to see how he weaved all that together. So Sunday, there was an interfaith fireside where he was able to speak with other faith leaders and give remarks there. It was fantastic. On Tuesday, we did a service project. He did one in his hometown of Fairview. The lieutenant governor did one in her town of Spanish Fork. And then we did one up in Salt Lake at the Utah Food Bank, and I got to participate in that. What was interesting about that is as the governor was speaking before we went and started sorting food and all of that, he talked about Utah is number one in volunteerism. But something that really struck me is he said, we need to teach the next generation how to serve. And I just thought, here I'm a mom of 4 kids and they're in their 20s. And I've thought a lot about that. And I thought, I've got to do a better job in my own family of perpetuating that service-minded, finding ways that we can be intentional about our service. And so it really struck me. And then we come to Wednesday where he and the lieutenant governor just gave incredible speeches. So one of the things the lieutenant governor talked about in her speech, it was the power of and I thought it was so good. Some of the things she mentioned, we can get water to the Great Salt Lake and we can get water to the Westwater community down in San Juan. We can, build highways, the Davis Highway, but we can also build rural roads that change people's lives. We can welcome refugees and new Americans and support immigration reform. We can disagree better and respect, or disagree with somebody and respect them. And so it was a really great way to set the tone for this incredible inauguration ceremony.
I do want to stay for a minute on the lieutenant governor's speech because I do found it great. I think the and principle was really powerful because it seems to me that in today's society, and she alluded to this, that we are not good at that. And I don't know if it's just a function of mainstream modern press that can be more divisive or social media that can be more divisive. But it just baffles me sometimes that it's like we cannot have an and conversation, that if you disagree with someone, you must hate them. And in fact, the only way to disagree strongly enough is to be a jerk and hate them. That's kind of prevalent today. Or anytime anyone focuses on particular areas of public policy, it's almost always framed as antagonistic to something else. Why do you think that is, and how do we fix it? How do we actually take her principles, this idea of this and approach, and operationalize it in our own lives. Why does that seem so hard today, do you think?
I just think it is hard. And I think, it's often a zero-sum game for people, right? Like if you're getting something, then somebody else has to go without. And we can build each other. We can do both. I do think that when we have great leaders like Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson, Governor Spencer Cox, and others who are talking about this and explaining that we can do both, I think that's good for people to hear. I think we as Utahns need to hear that more often.
There's another thing as well that you mentioned in this week of inauguration events and activities, this principle of, we need to sort of teach our kids. We need to teach the next generation. As you were talking, that famous quote from President Reagan that he referenced, where freedom is only ever one generation away from extinction. I want to see if we can apply that to this, that while, yes, that's true, and we need to invest in the next generation's knowledge of the principles of freedom. That's a huge aspect of what we do here at Sutherland Institute. But could we say the same thing of sort of our civic duty and our civic responsibility? And what I mean by that is that so often today, our conversations around any challenging societal issue immediately pivots to what can the government do to fix it, and specifically what can the federal government do to fix it. And it seemed like the theme from this inaugural week was, that should be the last place you go. There are these other civic institutions and bonds and connections that actually made our society, our social fabric healthy and strong. That's where we should be going. How do we teach that to our kids, in addition to the kind of the traditional principles of freedom and democracy that we enjoy?
No, it's so true. I mean, we hope that we can do it through civics courses in schools and things like that. But, one of the things that the governor touched on in his speech, he started by hitting some policy pieces, right? Like, we've increased teacher pay. We've seen the largest tax cut in history. We have the Olympics. There's all these great things to celebrate. And he said, we're not going to take credit for that because that's not because of us as your leaders. And then he went in to talk about how, Utah's known best state for volunteerism, best state, best economy, best place to start a business, all these things, that Utah's number one. We are number one, the number one state in the nation. Well, it's not because of our government leaders, he said. So he started talking about people from his own community from growing up. He talked about next door neighbors, a family that lived next door, and he hung out with their kids and the influence that they were. He talked about a scoutmaster. He talked about his step aunt and uncle, a school teacher who had tremendous impact on him, taught him how to write, helped him to see that education was so important. And his overall theme was, Utah's not number one because of government. It's because of the people. It's because of the people that we have around us. And that's kind of how he built up this explanation of social capital and really, who helped him in his life. When he was struggling as a child, who helped to save him? It wasn't government that came to the rescue. It was the next door neighbor or the scoutmaster or these other people who helped him.
There's an important principle there, and on the social capital piece, we have a clip. We have actually a few clips from the show that our producer Spencer will help us play, and we'll kind of react to together with our listeners. But this principle of, again, kind of focusing on people and civic institutions and familial relationships and neighbors. There's a kind of a broad principle I want to tease out of that. That again, this idea of anytime there's something hard in society, our default is pass a bill, ideally from Congress, or the president should just do something. Again, that we're trying to say that's actually not, there's an important role for those institutions, but in many instances, that's actually not the right approach. And the way I would suggest that we think about it is in terms of, look at whatever problem or challenge you're thinking about that's important to you, and then ask yourself, how did this problem originate? Was it because of a lack of government policy in some way? Did government cause this problem? If yes, then sure, government can be an important part of the solution. But if it wasn't a governmental or a public policy problem to begin with, if it was a social problem, societal, communal, any of those kinds of things, maybe public policy is not the right lens through which to look at fixing it. It can play a role, but that's one of the themes that I think from the governor's speech and the lieutenant governor's address, that just we tend to look at the difficult challenges in society through the wrong lens. And that's what this week and these speeches seem to me to help us reset on what are the right lenses, what are the right institutions.
Well, and I think you're exactly right. Government cannot be all things to all people. One of the things that I think makes our state great is that we have a really active philanthropy community who's contributing and engaged and not just given money even, but sitting on some of these boards to help us solve difficult problems. We have nonprofits out there who are doing tremendous work. We have faith institutions who give so much to our community. And so those institutions, and then we have strong families. And what happens at home, if we can have children supported at home, it's the least expensive and the best way we can give them the chance for the most success in their life. And that's what we need to focus on. But that can't be government that's fixing it, right? So
right,
it's tough.
The thing that stands out to me is if I was thinking about this earlier as we're preparing for this conversation, having watched the governor's inaugural speech a couple of times, and thinking, okay, if I were talking to a group of young men, who are thinking, well, how can I make a difference? How can I? Same thing for young women. But my wife and I, we have 2 little boys, so I'm thinking of them that, okay, as they get older, they're too young to have these conversations now. But as they start to think, well, how can I make a difference and do good in the world? I think the first thing I would say is be or prepare to be a good husband and a good father. Start there. And a lot of what the governor talked about was that because we have so many people in Utah focusing on that, how can I be a good husband, a good wife, a good father, a good mother, a good neighbor, a good family member, these civic institutions, there's a ripple effect that we recently as society are beginning to quantify in terms of social capital, that's again, the foundation. And so let's go ahead and play the first clip. We have 3 clips to play from the governor's speech, and then we'll kind of respond to it. And there's some other things. We'll get into some public policy as well, but let's go ahead and play the first clip from the governor's speech.
And if we only measure financial capital, Utah may fall short by many measuring sticks. But you see, where we truly shine, and this is the secret to our success, is something a little more obscure called social capital. Experts describe social capital as the connections among individuals and the norms of reciprocity and trustworthiness that arises from them. Several studies have shown that Utah leads the nation in social capital, and there really isn't a close second. Social capital is measured in categories like family unity and interaction, social support, and institutional effectiveness. It includes rates of service and volunteering, philanthropy, and something called civic virtue. Most importantly, social capital is not created by government. It is created in our families, our congregations, our neighborhoods, in our volunteer organizations. You see, here's the point. The incredible things that we have been able to accomplish over the past 4 years happened because of our strong social capital. And if we want to continue to cut taxes, create jobs, build infrastructure, lift people out of poverty, and make the American dream a reality for the next generation, we need more of it. And it can only happen one family, one neighborhood, and one community at a time.
Aimee, there's something that stood out to me from what the governor said. I mean, a number of things, but he referenced the American dream. And he said that essentially, if we want more of the American dream, if we want the American dream to be more attainable for more people, we need more social capital. Notably, he didn't say we need more capital gains investments from corporations and low-income zip codes. We need more workforce programs. We need more education. Yes, we need those things. Those things are good. But the first and foremost, kind of the foundation of all of it is social capital. I'll kind of share my first reaction and get your thoughts, and then I'd love to hear what you think is an important thing for our listeners to tease out from that as well. But that I think sometimes we think about the American dream in the wrong way because we go to what we can measure, which is usually income. I mean, he mentioned at the beginning of that clip that if we only looked at financial capital, Utah wouldn't do as well as other states in a lot of ways. But does this speak to, in my mind, a shifting of how we define the American dream. That yes, financial economic stability is a really important part of that, but the reason that people want that or view that as a benefit is because, well, the stability I can provide for my family. The American dream, yeah, income, economic upward mobility is a very important part of that. But the reason for that is because of my wife and kids, our family, our faith community. That's what kind of really enriches life, where you feel like I'm really living the American dream. And again, is this a shift that we need to have as a society?
I absolutely think it is. I mean, we've talked a lot before we've had people who have come and said, hey, we need to have universal childcare because if we had every woman in the workforce, look at how great our economy would be and all the things that would happen. And yet there's a piece to that of, but don't we want parents to choose what's best for them and their children, and who cares for them? And maybe that is one of the parents staying at home. And so in Utah, I think we've really tried to have that priority of families making decisions that are best for them instead of government making the decisions that government thinks is best for them. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the American dream is achievable. It's something that we can do, but it is that support system within our homes that is so critical.
Maybe another way to think about it is, because you mentioned the child care issue, and often when we talk about government programs, even when we measure poverty, there's a big debate or discussion in sort of the world of poverty scholars about how we measure poverty, that if you incorporate government safety net programs, what economists call transfer programs, things like food stamps and Medicaid and those kinds of programs, that if you account for those, the poverty rate changes because, well, now people have more essentially financial assets to pay for the things they need. And we've talked a lot about safety net reform on previous episodes, but again, I think we're missing the right definition of the American dream, because if you could wave a magic wand and tomorrow everybody magically had plenty of money in their bank accounts, I'm not saying that wouldn't make a difference. That would do a lot of good for a lot of people. We believe in financial upward mobility 100%. But to use a term, maybe it's necessary but not sufficient. Because if all of a sudden your immediate financial needs are met, but you still don't have a strong connection to family, to a faith congregation, to a civic institution in your community, I don't think you will really feel yet like you have experienced the American dream.
Right. Well, and I think, like you mentioned, social capital is difficult to define, which is such a big piece of that. Let me tell you something that I found. So the Joint Economic Committee in the U.S. Senate did a study in 2018. And that's where we first saw some numbers that just showed Utah had such a head start over every other state in social capital. But among the component variables underlying the state index, here are some of the things that they looked at. So volunteer rate, heavy television watching by children, the share of adults who made charitable contributions, the share with emotional and social support, heavy usage of electronics among children, adults that are married, children living with a single parent, births that went to unwed mothers. These are all factors that were taken into consideration to create the state index that they were creating. At the county level, they said the highest correlates of social capital were violent crime, children with a single parent, the share of adults currently married, voting rates, and nonprofits plus congregations. So there's different pieces that make this up, which makes it kind of tricky to go, well, how do we improve? How do we make sure that we remain the top state for social capital, which I think then overflows into everything else that makes our state great. But those are some of the things that they had measured and looked at when they were looking at this.
And again, I think it's worth reemphasizing that like all of this is, and I think we'll get into it a little bit more as well, these are kind of high-level principles, but they create the deep foundation for a thriving society that you still need public policy interventions, again, to improve financial stability and upward mobility. Obviously, with a thriving private sector economy, you absolutely need that. But that, again, there's a difference between checking boxes as far as what we traditionally as a society have measured in terms of upward mobility in the American dream. There's a difference between that and truly thriving and thinking that, well, my life is the way I want it to be. I feel a sense of purpose. I feel I am needed. I have responsibilities that are fulfilling, that give me joy when I carry out those responsibilities. The you alluded to earlier, again, the childcare issue, there's not a great metric that I'm aware of that can measure the quantity and quality of time between a parent and a child.
Right.
And when we focus only on sort of to borrow a term from Tim Carney at an event they did with us, AEI in Sutherland a couple years ago, if we only have kind of this GDP maximalization approach, that doesn't account for, the time my wife gets to spend with our boys, or the time that I get to spend reading them stories and playing. I mean, those are aspects of social capital that, to your point, if we can develop more mechanisms to measure, that can weave into our public messaging the way the governor has and the way the lieutenant governor has.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because we talk about man, what is the ideal for kids? What's the ideal for this? And, traditional families and a 2-parent household. I mean, the data is so clear. 2-parent household is so much better for kids and giving them the potential and great upward mobility. So then what do we say to the Utahns who are struggling there, who are single parents, who dealt with childhood trauma and abuse? There's people who are struggling, and Utah is becoming more diverse. And so how do we look at that and figure out, how do we help everyone? How do we help make sure that everybody can participate in this? And I know the governor addressed in his speech that government can't be all things to all people. And so anyway, it's always an interesting thing.
Let's play another clip, because I think it touches on some of that. This idea that, my wife sometimes jokes like the government can't save you. And so again, there is a vital role. We work in the public policy space. So in some ways, this conversation feels a little odd that we're talking about all the things public policy can't do, whereas that's what we do for a living. But I think it's important to view public policy interventions as often necessary and vital and helpful ways to build upon an already existing social structure to make a difference on issues and advance things forward. And that's the ideal. And I think that's largely what we have in Utah. So let's play the second clip, because I think it touches on this and also dives in a little bit more deeply to the idea of civic institutions.
Faith, family, and community. Faith, family, and community. Utah has it, and the rest of the world is desperately yearning to find it again. We must not give up now when it's needed more than ever. With marriage rates down worldwide, births at an all-time low, deaths of despair at an all-time high, and a sense of community vanishing across much of the Western world, Utah must stand tall as that shining city on a hill. We must be different. There is no government program we can create or law we can pass that will solve these problems. Now, some may try, and they will inevitably fail in that process. C.S. Lewis once described it as running back and forth with fire extinguishers at a time of flood. There is only one true solution, and it begins within the walls of our own homes and then extends to our neighbors.
Aimee, the governor says they're faith, family, and community, which as I was watching the speech, I got excited because the Sutherland, our 3 pillars are faith, family, and freedom. So again, these key principles of the American founding and these civic institutions are very resonant and parallel across the board. But watching him as he's talking about that, the thing that came to my mind was this idea of self-government, of faith, family, and community, faith, family, freedom, as we would say at Sutherland, and everything that goes into that really are sort of the civic pillars of what's necessary for self-government. So we talk about it in terms of the ideals and principles enshrined in America's founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution. That American founding created the structure, the principles. But then the civic institutions created a foundation that allowed us to actually live those principles. And I want to come back to this idea of self-government, is that those 2 broad buckets together and those 3 pillars that the governor mentioned, those are necessary for self-government. And I guess my question to you is, does it feel like we as a country, as a society, are losing a little bit of our ability or our willingness to engage in self-government, and the erosion of these institutions, is that kind of the symptom of that? And if so, how do we reverse course?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And I think so many people have started to rely on government as their primary source to fix all of their issues. And there's just some things we can't. But what we can do is help educate. I think often as we're talking about things that make life harder for people, when we talk about, like I'd mentioned before, childhood trauma, for instance, we now know more about how to counteract adverse childhood experiences, right? And it's through the positive childhood experiences. And one of the most important things, which sounds so cliche, but it's having dinner together as a family. We have data in the Department of Health and Human Services that will show you crystal clear how impactful that is. When you can have dinner together as a family, obviously not with your phones like this, but when you can enjoy conversation, when you can connect as a family, it drastically increases and overcomes negative experiences. When a child has someone in the community that they can go to in addition to their parent, that's another positive childhood experience that's overcoming negative trauma or abuse or other things that are happening to them, had happened to them. When the governor talked about his school teacher or his scoutmaster, these are people who are helping to add to these positive childhood experiences that are giving resiliency, which is such a key piece of being successful. So there's things that we can do. And I think talking about it, educating, helping people understand what the data is showing is really, really important.
I think that's a good point and a way to kind of connect this again to the public policy conversation. If we view it in terms of I as a citizen of this country and as a Utahn, I have certain responsibilities, obviously to my wife and to my kids, also to my faith congregation, to my community, to my neighbors. I am bound by responsibility to these other connections, these social capital connections in my life. And they have responsibility to me. And if we can view it through the lens of self-government starts in the home, in the neighborhood, in the church pews, in the small concentric circles of community around me, and it fans out from there. And ultimately, it does get to the state legislature and the governor. There's self-government that happens there, and to Washington, D.C., of course. But maybe we just need to start first in the home, the way the governor talked about, is start there and then build out rather than the other approach.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think we appreciate enough how important that is, to have people in your home. It was interesting when the governor first created the Office of Families, when we talked about, how do we define a family when people I've had people ask me, well, how do you define family? And my answer is, look, family is a group of people who can rely on each other for support. And how that looks is up to you. Like, your family might look different than somebody else. We're not just talking traditional families, but we need to give each other that support. And that's really what this is about. I think of the behavioral health, the mental health crisis that we're dealing with. So many times, I know we've got kids who, if they could feel like they could talk to just their parent and be frank with them and not have them freak out or have them know how to help them, like, that is such a great way to help that child. And it really is, in a lot of cases, somebody that's around them that can give them that support, not necessarily, a professional. Sometimes it is a professional, but it starts with the family and having that support system around you.
So, Aimee, where do we see sort of an appropriate application of public policy interventions? The governor, just the role of a governor, obviously has an amazing bully pulpit opportunity to articulate some of these broad principles, kind of remind us as Utahns and Americans of those founding principles and the civic institutions, and almost kind of give that encouragement, okay, I need to engage more. And again, these areas of social capital responsibilities that I have in my home and my community. But there obviously is still a role for government to play and public policy to play. So I guess I'll frame the question this way. If I've done everything I can in my home, my neighborhood, my faith group, but there are still some challenges we're trying to fix as a state, as a society. what do we do next? What is the appropriate application of public policy or government intervention, maybe to fill the gaps that still exist?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things I love about our governor is he is so forward-thinking and very visionary, and he can see, what are some things that we can do to be helpful, and what are things that we should stay out of and not do. One of the things he said in his speech, he said, service, faith, freedom, and opportunity nurtured and built here in Utah. And he's trying to see our state as a place where we're builders. We're building things. We're built here is what the theme is for his second term priorities. And as he's looked at that, at that policy piece, he's got a strategic plan. He's looking at people, place, and prosperity as the three pillars. And I think as we look forward to his State of the State, we're going to hear more about policy. And so understanding the people, the families, the social capital that makes Utah unique is kind of the initial thing that we need to be understanding because it's so important to our success as a state. But then we're going to see more policy too, so that government can implement things that are going to be helpful to see Utah be successful.
Do you kind of see it basically as a 1-2 punch or a foundation and then kind of adding the bricks and mortar? I guess whatever analogy would make the most sense, but this reminding people of the importance of social capital, of our civic institutions, again, families as kind of the fundamental building block and fanning out from there, is by doing this, is he and his administration essentially making it a lot easier to have the right kind of public policy conversation because we're doing so on a foundation of, again, these core civic institutions that we need to protect and strengthen in Utah.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. Yes.
So what in the minutes we have left, what kinds of things should we anticipate or should we look for as far as kind of you mentioned the strategic plan of the next 4 years that the governor has? What are some things that we should be aware of as listeners, as voters? And then we'll talk about, again, how that ties into our role individually in terms of responsibilities and essentially just what's on deck for Utah in this coming legislative session and this coming 4 years.
Yeah. Well, what I loved is the governor gave this to everyone who attended the inauguration. And so they could see what the plan is for the second term. When we talk about people, which is obviously what we've been talking about today, there's things like intergenerational poverty. How do we help those who have been struggling in poverty become self-sufficient? So that's something that he's looking at. Behavioral health, like we mentioned, stable housing. That's been a important project for the governor for the last year as we've been looking at housing and what can we do to get more starter homes for families. We have lots to look forward to. We have the Olympics coming. So we're looking at how do we ensure that we're ready for that. Education is a huge priority, both K through 12, but also higher ed. How do we make our state the greatest place for companies to find employees who are educated and ready to go? They have the skills ready to be successful. So there's a lot that we have to look forward to. And, the governor's got great people that are running these agencies that are helping to execute some of these things. And I'm looking forward to the next 4 years. I think it's going to be great.
Well, it's exciting to be a Utahn today. Of course, we still have challenges in the state, and we're not perfect. There's a lot of things we want to improve upon. But a number of conversations that I've been in with entities from other states, they constantly point to Utah. And you mentioned earlier in the conversation the accolades that the governor ran through, mentioning that these things are there, but it's really all about the people. And so I think that how do we, take that feeling of optimism and apply it to this and the additional public policy discussions, sometimes debates we're going to have as a state and as a nation? How do we, harness that positive, hopeful, optimistic kind of pioneer spirit that Utah is known for and bring that to the table for some of the big public policy challenges we're going to face here in Utah and as a nation?
Yeah, well, we do well with that here in Utah because we work together. I think we're seeing on the national level a lot of politicians who want to tear each other apart if they're on opposing sides on an issue. And here in Utah, we don't want that to happen. We want to have a functional government where we have respect. We can disagree. We can have great debates on issues, but at the end of the day, we get things done. We collaborate and we work together. Some of our tough issues that we're facing in the future, water, that's a massive thing that we're going to be looking forward to. We have been, but also energy. And there's so many bright things on our horizon as Utah to lead out on, and energy is one of them. And so I think we've got a lot of things well poised for success.
A lot of people often complain about politics in general, saying, well, I hate politics, everyone's mean, and it's all self-interested and all these things. And there are aspects of politics that can be frustrating at times. But I think that what you just articulated, and again, looking through the governor's strategic document and the way you're kind of outlining the approach, in my mind, public policy is a very exciting field because really it is just an opportunity to try and fix problems and make things better. And again, as we've been talking about today, built on that foundation of our civic institutions, social capital, families, all those kinds of things, that's the priority. Then public policy builds on top of that. But it's an opportunity for us to actually make a difference. And that, if we're having the same conversation 4 years from now or a decade from now, we can look back and say, look at all the additional things that got better in Utah and hopefully throughout the nation because we remained anchored to these principles and these approaches that we've talked about. We have one more clip that I want to play that, again, kind of ties back to the importance of families. And then as we wrap up, maybe tie back to this long-term vision that we've been talking about. So let's go ahead and play that third clip from the governor's inaugural address.
So if you want to understand Utah's success, it really is this simple. Moms and dads, husbands and wives, brothers and sisters, friends and neighbors, there never has been nor will there ever be another replacement.
Aimee, that's a shorter clip, but it's poignant, and it reminds me of an experience I had I want to share to kind of close out the theme. A number of years ago, in a different job I was working at the time, I sat down to have a work meeting with a colleague, and he asked me, he said, okay, so 10 years from now, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of life 10 years from now? And at the time, I just found out that my wife was pregnant with our first baby. And I remember thinking instantly everything was different for me because I could tell my friend and colleague was kind of teeing up a conversation of, well, Utah's economy and our policies and our taxes and our workforce and energy and all these that's the conversation he wanted to have. And that's what he was asking in terms of 10 years from now, what's the thing that's on your mind? But I couldn't think of any of that because on my mind, 10 years from now, I'll have a 10-year-old little boy. And instantly I thought, everything I do in my work, in my family, in my faith, in my community is different now because it's oriented towards the question of what can I do with my time in this life so that when he's 10 and 20 and 30 and beyond, that things are better for him and now for both of our boys. And I think this recentering on these important civic institutions is sort of a way to help remind us of, in the long run, the things that really matter. And it's this long-term focus. And I love this theme of family being so critical to the speech this past week and the administration as a whole and the role that you play in the administration with the Office of Families is anyone who's a parent knows that so much of what you do is you think long-term and you think about building. And I can't think of a better metaphor for how we think about governance in this state and in this country. So I just want to kind of tee that up and ask for your closing thoughts as well on the message that we've heard and kind of that question of, well, what's next for us as Utahns and Americans?
Yeah. Well, highways, infrastructure, that's built in Utah, but so are marriages, families, social connections. Those are things that really create our communities. And so, I'm very optimistic. I think Utah has such a bright future. I think if we continue in the direction we are with being willing to work together, collaborate, and recognize what we can do to change our own little part of the world in our homes. Do we need to do a little bit better putting our phones away and connecting with our family members when we're home at night? Do we need to better prioritize the things that really matter? Our faith, serving others, teaching our children. Those are the things that will continue to make Utah a great place to live.
There's one final thought, because you just said it, reminded me back to your initial comments about the Lieutenant Governor's speech, the and. and I wrote down highways and marriages, which is maybe a weird pairing, but it's kind of the wonky government policy stuff that we have to do that's really important. And it's these deeper social connections, these building up these civic institutions, focusing on our families, our faith groups, and all these different things. That, again, just bring it back to we can do both. We need to do both. And maybe we do it better than elsewhere in the nation, and we can continue to do that and export it throughout the country.
Absolutely.
Well, Aimee, we will leave it there. I'm sure we'll have future conversations. We're going into a legislative session soon. There will be a lot of ongoing discussions and debates about wonky policy issues and major civic institution and social capital topics that make a difference on these things. And just want to thank you for everything you're doing with the Office of Families and the Governor's Administration, and thanks for lending your time here on Defending Ideas.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we're going to take a quick break before we leave you with some final talking points. This is Defending Ideas. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Sometimes it's hard to keep up with the latest policy debate that affects your life. The solution? Subscribe to Sutherland Institute's weekly newsletter, where you'll find in-depth insights from seasoned policy experts, compelling multimedia, and advance notice of special events. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back to Defending Ideas. There's an important principle undergirding all of this that I think is all too easy to forget. A crucial part of the foundation for the American experiment is the principle of self-government, which of course requires a healthy spirit of individual responsibility. The core institutions of civil society, like family, faith, community, and more, are essential structures that help channel our personal responsibility in ways that are productive and beneficial for ourselves and everyone else. It is a lot harder for government or public policy to address important issues if we've ignored the role we each play in these civic institutions, or if we let the institutions themselves erode. This is a key part of the mission of Sutherland Institute, which is to equip Americans to advance principled public policy that promotes the constitutional values of faith, family, and freedom. Part of that is offering a reminder to each of us of the vital connection between America's founding ideals, the principles we aspire to realize in our execution of self-government, and the civic institutions that actually equip us to live out these principles. All of this offers an indispensable foundation for tackling the great public policy challenges of our day. I'm just glad the governor helped remind us of the core building blocks of a functional culture first, so we're better equipped to take on the big challenges before us. Well, that will do it for this episode of Defending Ideas. If you enjoyed this discussion, please visit defendingideas.org, where you can access previous episodes and watch or listen on your favorite platform. Don't forget to subscribe to Defending Ideas on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you like to get your shows. And please share this episode on your own social media profiles or with a friend, family member, or coworker, anyone who you think might find it interesting. And lastly, if you want to support the broad work of Sutherland Institute, if you want more conversations like this, please make a contribution at sutherlandinstitute.org/donate. Thanks again for joining us on Defending Ideas from the Sutherland Institute in Salt Lake City. I'm Nic Dunn. We'll see you next time.